Okay, so let's make a start. So you're all very welcome to this session. I'd just like to welcome my new member of staff that we have in the CTEL team, Emmett Culnan. Emmett has just joined us this week. And Emmett, you're a co-host of this session, so you might just keep an eye on the waiting room, and any latecomers, you might just pop them into the meeting.
No problem.
Emmett is was working in IT Carlow, but he's joined us here now. So I just wanted to introduce you to Emmett. Okay, so this is Moodle quiz, and we're going to have a look at some of the quiz functionality inside in Moodle. Okay, so just to let you know that the session is being recorded, so we can basically put this session in the CTEL training hub. So the recording of this session will be available in the CTEL staff training hub. So it's underneath the webinars archive. There's a tile there for webinars archive. And if you go in there, there's an area for Moodle quiz. So the recording for this session will be in that area. So what are we going to have a look at today? So in this session, we're going to have a look at the quiz as an assessment activity. There's actually a 3-step process involved. We're going to have a look at the question bank, the quiz setup, and the quiz questions. We're going to have a look at sharing questions and a little bit about question management. We're going to have an exercise as well, so I have a nice little quiz for you to do. And nothing too taxing, but big grand. I just want to demo a couple of things for you, just so you can see it from a student's perspective. And as I said, then we'll have the Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so just to let you know that we're on Moodle 3.9, and you know, lots of activities in there, lots of activities, different ways of doing different things, some slight improvements, one which I'm going to try and show you today, and I'm going to try and demo it with yourself as well. Okay, so so the quiz in Moodle, so there's probably 2,500 quiz activities, maybe more at this stage. So the quizzes can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're new to quizzes, can be a little bit difficult to configure at the start. But they can be extremely powerful, especially when you have large numbers in your classes, in your modules. So there's lots of options around timing and availability, feedback, and all that kind of stuff. Basically, the message that we're sending out as regards quizzes is that it's highly configurable. So now, obviously, there's limits, but you know, it's fairly flexible in its configuration. So the quiz and the questions exist separately, and we'll kind of talk on that now in a second. So there's lots of different question types. Popular ones are multiple choice, true or false, those type of questions, but they are kind of like calculated questions and short answers, essay type questions as well. So the questions are actually stored in a question bank. And this is what we'll talk about as well when we're talking about sharing questions and question management and all that type of stuff. It's just to let you know that questions are stored separately. People think the questions are inside in the quiz. They're not really, they're stored separately inside in a question bank. And we will be looking at that as well. So let's have a look at how you might actually build the quiz activity. So if we start with the very first step. So I mentioned earlier, there was a 3-step process. So the very first step in the process is your question bank. So your question bank exists. So each module in Moodle has one question bank. And what you can do is you can create questions in that question bank. As I said, it's totally separate to the quiz. And you can add categories and different things like that to your question bank. The second step in the process is the quiz setup. So once you're finished and you're reasonably happy with your question bank and the questions inside in the question bank, what you can do then is you can move to step 2, which is where you actually add the quiz activity. You give it a start date, a close date, maybe some things around timing, maybe some options around the review options, different things like that. It's basically the settings for the quiz activity. And then you move to the 3rd step, where you add the questions from the question bank to the quiz. Okay, so that's the last step in the process. So this is the kind of sequence. You create your question bank, you'd set up the quiz activity, then you add the questions to the quiz from the question bank. Now I've kind of a dotted line between all 3 steps because there's a couple of different ways. Not only can you create or add questions to the question bank from the question bank, but you can add questions from the quiz to the question bank. I'll be showing you all this in a second. I know it sounds a bit convoluted and all that, but it's just the way it is, you know. This is just Moodle trying to be a little bit flexible in the way it kind of operates. Right, let's just have a look at a module, right? So your module will have a question bank and you'll have your quiz set up and you might have your questions inside in your quiz. So inside in your question bank, you can have multiple categories. So the example I always use is if you're teaching a marketing mix or marketing, some sort of a marketing 101 module, and you'll have your kind of like your product, your price, your place, your promotion, you'll have all those kind of whatever 5 Ps, I think, is something like that, right? You might have a section on your Moodle module for product. You might have another section for price. You might have another section for promotion and so on. But what you could do in your question bank is you could set up a category inside the question bank for product, another category for price, and another category for promotion. And you put all your product questions in the product category, not all your price questions inside your price category, and so on. Whereas your quiz then has things like your start date, your finish date and time, some time limit, whether you're applying restrictions, what sort of layout you want, whether you want to kind of shuffle your questions, shuffle the choices within the question and different things like that. But you can actually see that they're 2 separate things inside your module. So the question types. So you have multiple choice questions, true or false. They're probably the most common ones. You have some short answers, calculated, missing words, questions, essays. There's 15 or 16 different types of questions that you have in there. And look, just feel free to experiment with some of those questions. But as I said, multiple choice, true or false, essay type questions, they are the most common ones. The multiple choice and the true or false, and most of the other ones actually, will automatically grade for, the question for you. So just say, for argument's sake, you're using multiple choice question. The Moodle quiz will actually grade the quiz for you. And this is the beauty. This is why a lot of people use multiple choice, because the quiz actually grades it for them. So they get the results. You as the lecturer have the results straight away. The one caveat to that is that the essay question has to be graded manually. So you could have a question, you might have 30 multiple choice questions, and you might have maybe 1 essay question at the end. Well, the quiz will automatically grade your 30 multiple choice questions, but then you've got to manually, to finish out the grading process, you've got to manually grade the essay question. Okay, so let's just have a look at this kind of practical considerations. We'll have a look at the practical steps. We'll have a look at some sharing question banks, quiz completion and results and different things like that. So we'll just kind of dive in now to, I suppose, the demo part of it. So let's just have a look at the question bank just for a second. So what I'm doing is, you can all I'm just making sure everybody can see my Moodle screen, yeah? You might just give me the thumbs up there in the reactions if you can. Yeah. Okay, so you're all looking at my Moodle screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen again. And so we're going to have a look at this Moodle quiz. I'm just going to take this Moodle quiz testing option here just for a second. So this is just a test quiz area that I have. So if you want to get to the question bank, we get a lot of questions around, well, how do I get to the question bank? So over here in the right-hand corner, you'll see the actions menu. It's just above the turn editing on button. And if you click on that button there, you will get down at the bottom a more option. If you click on more, just down at the bottom of that page, you see your question bank. So if you click on that question bank, you will see all the questions inside your question bank. Now, what I'm using here is across the top, you'll see a couple of options for categories. You'll see an import and an export option. So if I just start with the categories just for a second, you can see here that I have a general knowledge category, non-MCQ questions, basically different categories. Okay. Now, what I want to do here is, if I go back to my questions, and if I will just say switch categories, so you can select a category, and I'm just going to go to the general knowledge category. What I can do here is it's just showing me here are the questions that I have in my general knowledge category. I could create a new question. Say multiple choice, and I will say add a question. This question name here, right, is basically, I'm going to call it question X. It could be whatever it happens to be. I'll make up a question here. Now, this is very important, this question name, because it'll become quite apparent to you in a second, because when you build your question bank, what you need to come up with here is some sort of naming convention so that you can quickly look at questions in your question bank. So again, if I just go back to the question bank here for a second, you can see here that I have a lot of questions. But like, for instance, I have a question 1 here, WIT schools. But I've also another one up here, this question 1 here. So what you have to really try and think about is the naming conventions for the question. So this is the question name, and this is the question text, which is presented to the student. So I'm just going to create a question. You have lots of different options. Here are all the different options that you have. Just want to draw your attention to this other option on the bottom. So sometimes people ask me about, well, can I put in a label? So just say, for argument's sake, we spoke earlier about the different categories. So you might have product, price, place, promotion. If you wanted to have a heading on the top of a page, you could add a description and place it at the top of that page. And then when the students navigate to that page, you could have across the top of the page, you could have, say, questions on product or questions on price or whatever topic that you want the heading for. I'm just going to pick a multiple choice question. I'm going to add this question here. QX, I'm just going to call it river. Which river flows through Dublin City? I could put only one answer. So there is only one answer. We'll say they are, right? Liffey, and I'm going to say 100% correct. And I'm going to say here, sure. And I'm going to leave it at none because it's not right, it's wrong. And the barrow, same again, it's not right. And what I'm going to say here is the Slaney. Now, again, I'm going to leave that as none. What we could do as well is, you could say multiple answers here, multiple answers allowed. And what I could do is, depending on the question, I could allocate 50% to that and 50% to this guy. So you can kind of divvy up the marks a little bit like that as well, right? In this case, I'm just going to say it's 100% that one. And I'm going to say this is none. Okay. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to save those changes. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to my general knowledge. And it ain't there. So there it is at the bottom. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to move that question. So I'm going to say with selected. So I'm going to select this because I want that question in the general knowledge, but it's at the moment it's in this default. So I want to move it around a little bit. So I'm going to take select the question, and I'm going to say with selected move to my general knowledge category. Okay, and you can see now that if I went to categories, it has 5 questions in it instead of 4. And there's my question in the correct category. Okay, so look, you can go through your different categories like that. What you can do as well is I'm going to just show you a little bit about exporting. So we'll just say, for argument's sake, you wanted to share your questions with another colleague, or you wanted to share, or we'll just say for argument's sake, you wanted to use some of the same questions, but in a different module. So what you can do is you can export your questions from one module and you can import them into another one. Okay, so if I just go back to my home page for a second. And I'm going to have a look inside in this Moodle quiz. So this is a separate area inside Moodle. I'm going to have a look at the question bank. And I'm going to have a look at the categories. So I have my price, product, promotion, but I don't have a general knowledge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the general knowledge question from here. So if I go to my question bank and I go to the categories and I go to general knowledge and I export. Now, you have a couple of different options here, right? But the best option and the most reliable that I find, they'll all work, to be honest with you, but Moodle XML format is the recommended, the way I always do it anyway, and it always seems to work for me. So if I were you, I would export as an XML format and just say export questions to a file, and it should download it finally. So you can see down in the bottom left-hand corner, it's downloaded that file. Okay, so if I go back to my home again, and I go to Moodle quiz, which is a separate module, and I click on the actions menu again, and I navigate my way to the question bank. What I can do is I can import the file that I just exported from the other module. Now, if you export it as XML, you've got to import it in exactly the same format. So I'm going to choose XML there. And what I'm going to do is down in the left-hand corner here, I've got my file that I downloaded. I'm just going to drag that across here and drop it in there. And I'm going to say import. And I'm getting all the green lights, so everything looks good. So now if I go to categories as well as my price, product, promotion, now I've got a general knowledge category. Now you'll notice that I have this default category here because that category was underneath that default category. See the way these are all kind of like sub categories of this overall category. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that. And I'm just going to bump this in just to make it a subcategory for the default for this Moodle quiz. So it kind of looks neat and tidy now, so I'm kind of happy enough there, right? So that's how you might, let me just go back to the slides for a second. So that's just a little bit about the question bank and how you get to it, how you can add questions, how you can export questions, and how you might import questions. Okay, so that was step one. Let's move to step two and just take a look at setting up the quiz. Okay, so if I was in this module here and I went to, we'll just say the module homepage. So I've got a workshop here, right? So this is today's workshop. So I'm going to turn editing on and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add an activity or resource and I'm going to add a quiz. So general knowledge quiz. Okay, so I'm just going to put in a description there. You might want to put in some sort of a description for your students. The timing, basically this is when this quiz opens. So it opens today at 2:15. And it closes today at, I don't know, 17:15. Now, there is a time limit here. You can enable that. So you could say, I only want, just say 3 minutes. Or you could say, you know, 90 minutes. It's really up to you, right? I'll just leave it at 3 just for a second, just so you can see what happens. When the time expires, so if I enable the time limit, what can kind of happen is anytime between these two, the opening time and the close time, if I come in and I start it, basically I have 3 minutes to do it. And when the time expires, the open attempts are submitted automatically. So once I get to the end of the 2 minutes, it submits my quiz. Okay, so this is gradable. So you can add it to, it will automatically be added to the gradebook. But what you could do is you could put it into a category inside in your gradebook. Now that's a completely different, that's for another day, but you might, for instance, just say for argument's sake, you've got, you're working through weekly topics. At the end of each week, as just a way as a part of revision, you might have 5 questions or 3 questions, just to help the students revise what you did in that topic. But they're not getting any marks for it, they're not getting any grades for it. You might have that in a non-gradable activity in the gradebook. That non-gradable activity will appear here. Okay, if it's just uncategorized, it'll be just included as a gradable item on the gradebook. Now, the attempts allowed, this is basically where the flexibility comes into it. You can set it to be unlimited. Just say for argument's sake, if the students are doing it and you leave it at 1 attempt, if you leave it at unlimited, what will happen then is basically they can go back in again and they have unlimited attempts to do the quiz. But obviously they will have only whatever time. So they'll have unlimited time to do, they get 3 minutes, unlimited time, but only obviously between the open date and the close date. Okay, so this is kind of flexible. It's really what you want them to do. You could change that to you know, 2 or 3 goals, for instance, if you wanted. Just moving on to the layout, you could say, right, there's going to be 2 questions on every page, or there's going to be 4 questions on every page. I'll just leave it at 2 for a second. The navigation method is free. That means they can go backwards and forwards. So if I was on question 29, I could scroll all the way back to question 5, which I kind of might have marked to answer later. So that's a good option as well. The question behavior, they can shuffle within questions. So this is my ABCD is going to be shuffled each time. So my ABCD is different to your ABCD. Okay, so this is really, this setting here, each attempt builds on the last. Especially, it's important that if you choose unlimited, that you might say yes here, because if I go and have another attempt, you know, it'll start, if you say leave it at no, the quiz basically starts from scratch again. So what you want to do is you want to basically retain their answers. Again, you might not want to retain their answers. This is purely up to yourself, right? So this is where all the flexibility comes into it. Review options. So if this is part of formative assessment, you probably would not want to turn any of these on. If it's summative, you probably want to turn on let the students know whether they got it correct and whether they got the answer right. That type of stuff, especially if you're using it for revision or for reinforcement or to encourage independent learning and all that type of stuff. But if it's for continuous assessments and formative assessment, you basically need to have everything turned off here. You don't want the students getting the results until the results are being ratified at the course board. Okay, so a few other different things there as well. And this safe browser, I will talk about this in a second. Okay, so basically, this is where you can shut down the PC and they don't have access to anything else. And actually what we'll do is we will set this up now, right? So I'm going to say, yes, configure manually. Show the safe exam browser download button. I'm going to say yes to that because, especially now that we're online, right? So what I could have done was, if we were all in on campus, physically in the labs over in the IT building, I could liaise with my colleagues in IT or in computer services, sorry. Old habits die hard there. But we could ask the lads over across in computer services to install the safe exam browser on all the machines in the lab. And in that case, then the students wouldn't need to download it. But because they're all at home and they're all in remote locations, you need to have this set to yes, because they need to download that piece of software onto their computer so that they can take the quiz. They will not be able to take the quiz unless they do all these steps. Okay, so we leave that set to yes. And we'll just leave some of these. A lot of these are ask the user to confirm quitting. Yes. Are you sure you're sure type of thing. Enable quitting of. So if you want them just to quit the browser, they can. Reload the exam. Yeah. Show SEB, and that's SEB is the Safe Exam Browser acronym in a taskbar. Yes. Show the reload button. Yes. Show the time. This just shows that it's 14:47 now. It just shows them that. Show the keyboard layout. Yes. Wi-Fi controls. You can change that to yes, just so they can see whether the Wi-Fi is working or not. Auto enable audio controls. This might depend on whether you've got students with accommodations and different things like that. Same with the spell checker and that sort of stuff as well. There's a enable URL filtering as well. So if you said yes, you could say, I'm only allowing certain websites. Okay, but what we want to do is we want to say no, because we want to lock down all the websites. Extra restrictions on attempts. That's just if you want to give somebody another attempt, you can do that type of stuff as well. You can delay the attempts. So you could say, look, you must be 10 minutes in between attempts and all that kind of stuff. We're getting into the stuff that you might never use, right? So this is basically availability. So showing it on the module page. And basically, if this was set up for separate groups. So you only want group A to do this quiz and you want group B to do another quiz. So you're getting into that type of stuff as well. Restricting access as well, right? So you might say, well, I only want this student or these group of students. So you could add a restriction for, we'll say, a date. So you can only do this quiz after a certain date. Now you need to make sure that your timing up above, your open and close dates, link in with this restriction. The same with user profile. I only want one student to do this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go save and return to module. Okay, so so what we've done there now is we've looked at our step 1, which is the question bank. We've looked at step 2, which is the quiz and the setup of the quiz. So that's all the settings for the quiz. The third and the final part is the part about adding the questions to the quiz from the question bank. So back in here again, if I go back to the quiz, we can see here, there's the quiz. We finished step 2, so we click into it now for step 3. And we can see here straight away, we're getting a message that says no questions have been added yet. So we can edit the quiz. Now, I just want to bring your attention to this actions menu over here on the right-hand side. This is a lifesaver. If there was ever a magic bullet in Moodle, that's a magic bullet, okay? I'll show you this in a second. We'll just edit this quiz first. So here's the quiz, it's blank. So what we can see here is that there's an add. We can add the questions here, right? Now, remember earlier on I spoke about the dotted line between the third step and back through the second step and back to the question bank. That's because if I add a new question here, directly here in the quiz, which is a lot of people actually do it this way, what actually happens is it creates that question in the question bank. So if I click add a new question, it'll add whatever type of question, say multiple choice. I can add that question, but it's asking me now for the category. So which category do I want to put it in? So what's really going on there is you can see on the breadcrumb at the top of the page that I'm in the question bank. Okay, so I'll just go back to the quiz for a second and I'll edit the quiz again. So again, over here in the add option, there's that add a new question. There's a couple of other ones down here as well. Some people like to add a random question. So I could say add a random question. So I could say add 2 random questions from the general knowledge quiz. So I could say add 2 random questions. So now I can see that the question is random and it's from that category, the general knowledge category. I could add another 2 questions, but this time I want to manually add questions. So I can select my, whatever this is, I don't know. I'll go with the general knowledge one. Let's see just what's in that default. Default quiz. Okay. So that seems to be all the questions. Okay, so let's just go with the general knowledge and I don't know, I could add this question down here. So if you want to do it that way, you can. What I could do as well is I could clean up some of these. I could delete these questions. If I wanted to, I could preview the question. So there's the question previewed. Again, I could delete the question. Again, I can add back in, we'll say 4 questions like that. I could say add those questions. It's asking me, I can repaginate. So if I wanted to put in headers and different things like that, I could add in a header here. Okay, so I'd have to add obviously, you know, a new section heading and different things like that as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, right, just explain a little bit about these marks. So at the moment, it just defaults to 10, right? Now, you can leave all these alone, right? Because that 10 basically in Moodle terms is 100%. And it gives a default mark of 1, which is really, because there's 4 questions in it, Moodle will automatically calculate that 1 mark as 25%. If I add another question, if I add that question, now all of a sudden, this 1 mark now is 20%. And that's just basically the way it works. Okay. So just the way to think about it is the total marks are 5, but this 10% up here equates to 100%. And then what it will do then is it'll just subdivide percentage-wise the number of questions divided by the 100%. Okay, I'm just going to delete this question just to keep things nice and neat. Okay, so we're done and dusted now. We've added our questions, so I'm going to save my changes. Okay, and I'm going to go back here to the general knowledge quiz. Okay, so we can see now we've done our step 1, we've done our step 2, and we've just done step 3 now. So you're ready to release this basically to the students. So I just want to talk a little bit about this button up here, this actions menu. You can do a lot of things here, right? You can do user overrides. So I could say, I could add a user override. So I could say that Reggie Dwight basically has, instead of Reggie doing this quiz at, we'll say, instead of it finishing at 17:15, it's going to be 18:15 for Reggie because he has some sort of accommodation and he needs extra time, all that type of stuff. And I could save that, and there's the override in place. Okay. Back to the quiz again. I go back up to the actions menu. I can preview the quiz, right? I could start an attempt. I could work my way down through the attempt. Okay, so you can actually preview it and see what it looks like. You can see the time is ticking down over here. You all get that. This is the free navigation. I can go backwards and forwards. If I come down here, what I can do is I can edit the quiz and I can drop in more questions. I could drop them in on this page or that page or in the middle page, wherever. I can see the results. Nobody, they'll be here, but nobody did the results yet. What else can I do in there? See some stats and different things. I can have a look at the logs. So I can have a look at, well, who did this report? How did they do it? Did they look at it? There's a few other different things that you can do, group overrides. And the other thing then is I could edit the settings. So now you're back to the step 2 where you update the settings. Okay, so that's where we're going to do that, right? Okay, so that's what we've done there, right? So here's just some links. We're just coming to the end of the actual demo part. So I just have some links on this spreadsheet. I'm going to share this presentation in the CTEL Moodle Hub as well. So if you go to your home page, you should see the CTEL Hub. So down here, there's a webinar archive. And in here, the Moodle quiz. Okay, I'll share it in this area. Okay, so this is where now we're going to do a small exercise.